I'll be fine, I said, but Christos interrupted me. You are a good man, but your tongue is as sharp as a dagger. That's what worries me. There are all sorts of people in Konya. And it's no secret that some of them don't think highly of a Muslim who has taken to drink. You need to learn to be careful in public. Hide your ways, and watch what you say. I grinned. May we top off this speech with a poem from Khayyam? Christos heaved a sigh, but the Persian merchant who had overheard me exclaimed cheerfully, yes, we want a poem from Khayyam. Other customers joined in, giving me a big round of applause. Motivated and slightly provoked, I jumped onto a table and began to recite. Did God set grapes a growing, do you think, and at the same time make it a sin to drink? The Persian merchant yelled, of course not. That wouldn't make any sense. Give thanks to him who foreordained it thus. Surely he loves to hear the glasses clink. If there was one thing these many years of drinking had taught me, it was that different people drank differently. I knew people who drank gallons every night, and all they did was get merry, sing songs, and then doze off. But then there were others who turned into monsters with a few drops. If the same drink made some merry and tipsy and others wicked and aggressive, shouldn't we hold the drinkers responsible instead of the drink? For you know not whence you came, nor why, drink. For you know not why you go, nor where. Another round of applause followed. Even Christos joined the excitement. In the Jewish quarter of Konya, in a tavern owned by a Christian, we, a mixed bunch of wine lovers of all faiths, raised our glasses and toasted together, hard though it was to believe, to a God who could love and forgive us even when we ourselves clearly failed to do so. Ella. Northampton, May 31, 2008. Better safe than sorry, said the website. Check his shirts for lipstick stains, see if he comes home smelling of unfamiliar perfumes. This was the first time Ella Rubinstein had taken an online test, titled How to Tell If Your Husband is Cheating on You. Although she found the questions tacky, by now she knew that life itself could occasionally feel like one big cliché. In spite of her final test score, Ella didn't want to confront David on this matter. She still had not asked him where he'd been on the nights he hadn't come home. These days she spent most of her time reading Sweet Blasphemy, using the novel as an excuse to cover up her silence. Her mind was so distracted that it was taking her longer than usual to finish the book. Still, she was enjoying the story, and with every new rule of Shams' she mulled her life over. When the children were around, she acted normal. They acted normal. However, the moment she and David were alone, she caught her husband looking at her curiously, as if wondering what kind of wife would avoid asking her husband where he'd spent the night. But the truth was that Ella didn't want a piece of information she wouldn't know how to handle. The less she knew about her husband's flings, the less they would occupy her mind, she thought. It was true what they say about ignorance. It was bliss. The only time that bliss had been disrupted was last Christmas, when a survey from a local hotel arrived in their mailbox, addressed directly to David. Customer service wanted to know whether he was happy with his stays. Ella left the letter on the table, on top of a pile of mail, and that evening she watched him take the letter out of the opened envelope and read it. Ah, a guest evaluation form. The last thing I needed, David said, managing a half smile for her. We held a dental conference there last year. They must have included all the participants on their customer list. She believed him. At least the part of her that didn't like to rock the boat did. The other part of her was cynical and distrustful. It was that same part that the next day found the hotel's number and dialed it, just to hear what she already knew. Neither this year nor the one before had they ever hosted a dental conference. Deep inside, Ella blamed herself. She hadn't aged well, and she'd gained considerable weight over the last 6 years. With every new pound, her sexual drive had declined a bit further. The cooking classes rendered it more difficult to shed the extra pounds, though there were women in her group who cooked more often and better and still remained half her size. When she looked back at her life, she realized that rebellion had never suited her. She had never smoked weed with boys behind closed doors, gotten kicked out of bars, used morning after pills, thrown fits, or lied to her mother. Never cut class. Never had teen sex. All around her, girls her age were having abortions or putting their out-of-wedlock babies up for adoption, while she observed their stories as though watching a TV program on famine in Ethiopia. It saddened Ella that such tragedies were unfolding in the world, but the truth was that she never saw herself as sharing the same universe with those unfortunate ones. She had never been a party girl, not even as a teenager. She preferred to sit at home and read a good book on a Friday night rather than hoop it up with strangers at some wild party. "Why can't you be like Ella?" the mothers in the neighborhood asked their daughters. "See, she never gets herself in trouble." While their mothers adored her, the kids themselves saw her as a nerd with no sense of humor. No wonder she wasn't very popular in high school. Once a classmate told her, "You know what your problem is? You take life so seriously. You're fucking boring." She listened carefully and said she would think about that. Even her hairstyle hadn't changed much over the years. Long, straight, honey blonde hair that she pulled into an unrelenting bun or braided down her back. She wore little makeup, just a touch of reddish-brown lipstick and a moss-green eyeliner, which according to her daughter did more to hide than to bring out the grey-blue of her eyes. In any event, she never managed to draw two perfectly curved lines with the eyeliner and often went out with the line on one eyelid looking thicker than that on the other. Ella suspected that there must be something wrong with her. She was either too intrusive and pushy with regard to Jeanette's marriage plans or too passive and docile with regard to her husband's flings. There was an Ella the control freak and an Ella the hopelessly meek. She could never tell which one was about to emerge, or when. And then there was a third Ella, observing everything quietly, waiting for her time to come. It was this Ella who told her she was calm to the point of numbness, but that underneath there was a strangled self, harboring a fast freshet of anger and rebellion. If she kept going like this, the third Ella warned, she was bound to explode someday. It was just a matter of time. Contemplating these issues on the last day of May, Ella did something she hadn't done in a long while. She prayed. She asked God to either provide her with a love that would absorb her whole being or else make her tough and careless enough not to mind the absence of love in her life. "Whichever one you choose, please be quick," she added as an afterthought. "You might have forgotten, but I'm already 40. And as you can see, I don't carry my years well." Desert Rose the Harlot. Konya, October 17, 1244. Breathless, I ran and ran along the narrow alley, unable to look back. My lungs burning, my chest pounding. When I finally reached the busy bazaar, I dodged behind a wall, almost collapsing. Only then could I muster the courage to look behind me. To my great surprise and relief, there was only one person following me, Sesame. He stopped beside me, out of breath, his hands dangling limply at his sides, his expression bewildered and vexed, unable to comprehend why all of a sudden I had started running like crazy through the streets of Konya. Everything had happened so fast that it was only in the bazaar that I could put the pieces together. 1 minute I was sitting in the mosque, absorbed in the sermon, drinking in Rumi's pearls of wisdom. In my trance I failed to notice that the lad next to me had accidentally stepped on the ends of the scarf covering my face. Before I knew it, the scarf came loose and my turban slid aside, exposing my face and a bit of my hair. I fixed the scarf swiftly and continued listening to Rumi, confident that nobody had noticed anything. But when I raised my eyes again, I saw a young man in the front row looking at me intently. Square face, lazy eye, sharp nose, sneering mouth. I recognized him. He was Baibars. Baibars was one of those pesky customers none of the girls in the brothel wanted to sleep with. Some men have a way of wanting to sleep with prostitutes and yet at the same time insulting them. He was such a man. Always cracking lewd jokes, he had a terrible temper. Once he beat a girl so badly that even the boss, who loved money more than anything, had to ask him to leave and never come back. But he kept returning. At least for a few more months. Then, for some reason unbeknownst to me, he stopped visiting the brothel, and we didn't hear from him again. Now there he was, sitting in the front row, having grown a full beard like a devout man but still with the same fierce sparkle in his eyes. I averted my gaze. But it was too late. He had recognized me. Baibars whispered something to the man next to him, and then the two of them turned around and stared at me. Next they pointed me out to someone else, and one after another all the men in that row stared in my direction. I felt my face blush and my heart race, but I couldn't budge. Instead I clung to the childish hope that if I stayed still and closed my eyes, the darkness would engulf us all, leaving nothing to worry about. When I dared to open my eyes again, Baibars was pushing his way through the crowd toward me. I made a dash for the door, but it was impossible to escape, surrounded as I was by a thick sea of people. In a flash Baibars had reached me, so menacingly close I could smell his breath. Grabbing me by the arm, he said between clenched teeth, "What is a harlot doing here? Don't you have any shame?" Please, let me go," I stammered, but I don't think he even heard me. His friends joined him. Tough, scary, confident, disdainful fellows, reeking of anger and vinegar, raining insults on me. Everyone around turned to see what the commotion was about, and a few people tsked disapprovingly, but nobody intervened. My body as listless as a lump of dough, I meekly let them push me toward the exit. Once we reached the street, I hoped Sesame would come to my aid, and if worst came to worst, I would run away. But no sooner had we stepped into the street than the men grew more belligerent and aggressive. I realized in horror that in the mosque, out of respect for the preacher and the community, they had been careful not to raise their voices or shove me around, but outside on the street there was nothing to stop them. I had been through harder things in my life, and yet I doubt if I had ever felt so dejected before. After years of hesitation, today I had taken a step toward God, and how had He responded? By kicking me out of His house. "I should never have gone there," I said to Sesame, my voice cracking like thin ice. "They're right, you know. A harlot has no place in a mosque or a church or in any of His houses." "Don't say that." When I turned around to see who had said this, I couldn't believe my eyes. It was him, the wandering hairless dervish. Sesame broke into a wide smile, delighted to see him again. I lurched forward to kiss his hands, but he stopped me midway. "Please don't." "But how can I thank you? I owe you so much," I beseeched. He shrugged and looked uninterested. "You owe me nothing," he said. "We are indebted to no other than him." He introduced himself as Shams of Tabriz and then said the strangest thing ever: "Some people start life with a perfectly glowing aura but then lose color and fade. You seem to be one of them. Once your aura was whiter than lilies with specks of yellow and pink, but it faded over time. Now it is a pale brown. Don't you miss your original colors? Wouldn't you like to unite with your essence?" I looked at him, feeling utterly lost in his words. Your aura has lost its shine because all these years you have convinced yourself that you are dirty inside and out. I am dirty, I said, biting my lip. Don't you know what I do for a living? Allow me to tell you a story, Shams said. And this is what he told me. One day a prostitute passed by a street dog. The animal was panting under the hot sun, thirsty and helpless. The prostitute immediately took off her shoe and filled it with water from the nearest well for the dog. Then she went on her way. The next day she ran into a Sufi who was a man of great wisdom. As soon as he saw her, he kissed her hands. She was shocked. But he told her that her kindness toward the dog had been so genuine that all her sins had been pardoned there and then. I understood what Shams of Tabriz was trying to tell me, but something inside me refused to believe him. So I said, let me assure you, even if I fed all the dogs in Konya, it wouldn't be enough for my redemption. You cannot know that, only God can. Besides, what makes you think any of those men who pushed you out of the mosque today are closer to God? Even if they are not closer to God, I replied, unconvinced, who will tell them that, will you? But the dervish shook his head. No, that's not the way the system works. It is you who needs to tell it to them. Do you think they would listen to me? Those men hate me. They will listen, he said determinedly. Because there is no such thing as them, just as there is no I. All you need to do is keep in mind how everything and everyone in this universe is interconnected. We are not hundreds and thousands of different beings. We are all one. I waited for him to explain, but instead he continued, it's one of the 40 rules. If you want to change the way others treat you, you should first change the way you treat yourself. Unless you learn to love yourself, fully and sincerely, there is no way you can be loved. Once you achieve that stage, however, be thankful for every thorn that others might throw at you. It is a sign that you will soon be showered in roses. He paused briefly and then added, how can you blame others for disrespecting you when you think of yourself as unworthy of respect? I stood there unable to say a word as I felt my grip on what was real slip away. I thought about all the men I had slept with, the way they smelled, the way their calloused hands felt, the way they cried when they came. I had seen nice boys turn into monsters and monsters turn into nice boys. Once I had a customer who had the habit of spitting on prostitutes while he had sex with them. Dirty, he would say as he spit into my mouth and all over my face. You dirty whore. And here was this dervish telling me I was cleaner than fresh spring water. It felt like a tasteless joke, but when I forced myself to laugh, the sound didn't pass through my throat, and I ended up suppressing a sob. The past is a whirlpool. If you let it dominate your present moment, it will suck you in, said Shams as if he had read my thoughts. Time is just an illusion. What you need is to live this very moment. That is all that matters. Upon saying that, he took out a silk handkerchief from the inside pocket of his robe. Keep it, he said. A good man in Baghdad gave it to me, but you need it more than I do. It will remind you that your heart is pure and that you bear God within you. With that, the dervish grabbed his staff and stood up, ready to go. Just walk out of that brothel. Where how I have no place to go. That's not a problem, Shams said, his eyes gleaming. Fret not where the road will take you. Instead concentrate on the first step. That's the hardest part and that's what you are responsible for. Once you take that step, let everything do what it naturally does and the rest will follow. Do not go with the flow. Be the flow. I nodded. I didn't need to ask in order to understand that this, too, was one of the rules. Suleiman the Drunk. Konya, October 17, 1244. Before midnight I downed my last drink and left the tavern. Remember what I said. Watch your tongue, Hristos cautioned as he waved goodbye. I nodded, feeling fortunate to have a friend who cared about me. But as soon as I stepped into the dark, empty street, I was seized by a kind of exhaustion such as I had never felt before. I wished I had taken a bottle of wine with me. I could have used a drink. As I tottered with my boots clacking on the broken cobblestones, the sight of the men in Rumi's procession crossed my mind. It pained me to recall the flicker of loathing in their eyes. If there was one thing I hated most in the world, it was prudishness. I had been reprimanded by prim and proper people so many times that even the memory of them was enough to send a shiver down my spine. Struggling with these thoughts, I turned a corner and entered a side street. It was darker here because of the massive trees towering above. As if that weren't enough, the moon suddenly hid behind a cloud, shrouding me in thick, dense darkness. Otherwise I would have noticed the two security guards approaching me. "Salamun alaikum," I chimed, my voice coming out too merrily in the attempt to hide my anxiety. But the guards didn't return my greeting. Instead they asked me what I was doing out on the streets at this late hour. "Just walking," I mumbled. We stood face to face, anchored in an awkward silence pierced only by the howling of dogs far away. One of the men took a step toward me and sniffed the air. "It stinks around here," he blurted out. "Yeah, it reeks of wine," the other guard confirmed. I decided to treat the situation lightly. "Don't worry yourselves. The stench is only metaphorical. Since it is only metaphorical wine that we Muslims are allowed to drink, the smell must also be metaphorical." "What the hell is he raving about?" the first guard grumbled. Just then the moon came out from behind the cloud, covering us with its soft, pallid light. I could now see the man facing me. He had a square face with a protruding chin, ice blue eyes, and a sharp nose. He could have been handsome were it not for his lazy eye and the permanent scowl on his face. "What are you doing on the streets at this hour?" the man repeated. "Where are you coming from, and where are you going?" I couldn't help it. These are profound questions, son. If I knew the answers, I would have solved the mystery of our purpose in this world. "Are you making fun of me, you filth?" the guard demanded, frowning, and before I knew what was happening, he took out a whip, cracking it in the air. His gestures were so dramatically exaggerated that I chuckled. The next thing he did was to bring the whip down on my chest. The strike was so sudden that I lost my balance and fell. "Perhaps this will teach you some manners," the guard retorted as he passed his whip from one hand to the other. "Don't you know drinking is a major sin?" Even when I felt the warmth of my own blood, even as my head swirled in a sea of pain, I still couldn't believe I had been lashed in the middle of the street by a man young enough to be my son. "Then go ahead and punish me," I retorted. "If God's paradise is reserved for people of your kind, I'd rather burn in hell anyhow." In a fit of rage, the young guard started to whip me with all his might. I covered my face with my hands, but it didn't help much. A merry old song popped into my mind, forcing its way past my bloodied lips. Determined not to show my misery, I sang louder and louder with every crack of the whip. "Kiss me, my beloved, peel my heart down to the core, your lips are as sweet as cherry wine, pour me some more." My sarcasm drove the guard into a deeper rage. The louder I sang, the harder he hit. I would never have guessed there could be so much anger piled up inside one man. "That's enough, Baibars!" I heard the other guard yell in panic. "Stop it, man!" As suddenly as it had started, the lashing stopped. I wanted to have the last word, say something powerful and blunt, but the blood in my mouth muffled my voice. My stomach churned, and before I knew it, I vomited. You are a wreck, Vibars reprimanded. You have only yourself to blame for what I did to you. They turned their backs on me and strode off into the night. I don't know how long I lay there. It could have been no more than a few minutes or the whole night. Time lost its weight, and so did everything else. The moon hid behind the clouds, leaving me not only without its light but also without a sense of who I was. Soon I was floating in limbo between life and death and not caring where I would end up. Then the numbness started to wear off, and every bruise, every welt, every cut on my body ached madly, washing me with wave after wave of pain. My head was wobbly, my limbs sore. In that state I moaned like a wounded animal. I must have blacked out. When I opened my eyes, my salwar was drenched in urine and every limb of my body ached dreadfully. I was praying to God either to numb me or to provide me with drink when I heard footsteps approaching. My heart skipped a beat. It could be a street urchin or a robber, even a murderer. But then I thought, what did I have to fear? I had reached a point where nothing the night could bring was scary anymore. Out of the shadows walked a tall, slender dervish with no hair. He knelt down beside me and helped me sit up. He introduced himself as Shams of Tabriz and asked my name. Suleiman the drunk of Konya at your service, I said as I plucked a loose tooth from my mouth. Nice to meet you. You are bleeding, Shams murmured as he started to wipe the blood off my face. Not only on the outside, but inside as well. Upon saying that, he took out a silver flask from the pocket of his robe. Apply this ointment to your wounds, he said. A good man in Baghdad gave it to me, but you need it more than I do. However, you should know that the wound inside you is deeper, and that is the one you should worry about. This will remind you that you bear God within you. Thank you, I heard myself stutter, touched by his kindness. That security guard, he whipped me. He said I deserved it. As soon as I uttered those words, I was struck by the childish whining in my voice and my need for comfort and compassion. Shams of Tabriz shook his head. They had no right to do that. Every individual is self-sufficient in his search for the divine. There is a rule regarding this: we were all created in his image, and yet we were each created different and unique. No two people are alike. No two hearts beat to the same rhythm. If God had wanted everyone to be the same, he would have made it so. Therefore, disrespecting differences and imposing your thoughts on others is tantamount to disrespecting God's holy scheme. That sounds good, I said, amazing myself by the ease in my voice. But don't you Sufis ever doubt anything about him? Shams of Tabriz smiled a tired smile. We do, and doubts are good. It means you are alive and searching. He spoke in a lilting tone, exactly as if he were reciting from a book. Besides, one does not become a believer overnight. He thinks he is a believer, then something happens in his life and he becomes an unbeliever. After that, he becomes a believer again, and then an unbeliever again, and so on. Until we reach a certain stage, we constantly waver. This is the only way forward. At each new step, we come closer to the truth. If Christos heard you talk like this, he would tell you to watch your tongue, I said. He says not every word is fit for every ear. Well, he's got a point. Shams of Tabriz let out a brief laugh as he jumped to his feet. Come on, let me take you home. We need to tend to your wounds and make sure you get some sleep. He helped me get on my feet, but I could hardly walk. Without hesitation the dervish lifted me as though I weighed nothing and took me on his back. I warn you, I stink, I mumbled in shame. That's all right, Suleiman, don't worry. In this way, never minding the blood, urine, or stench, the dervish carried me along the narrow streets of Konya. We passed by houses and shacks plunged in deep slumber. Dogs barked at us, loudly and ferociously, from behind the garden walls, informing everyone of our presence. I have always been curious about the mention of wine in Sufi poetry, I said. Is it real or metaphorical wine that the Sufis praise? What difference does it make? My friend Shams of Tabriz asked before he dropped me off in front of my house. There is a rule that explains this: when a true lover of God goes into a tavern, the tavern becomes his chamber of prayer, but when a wine-bibber goes into the same chamber, it becomes his tavern. In everything we do, it is our hearts that make the difference, not our outer appearances. Sufis do not judge other people on how they look or who they are. When a Sufi stares at someone, he keeps both eyes closed and instead opens a third eye, the eye that sees the inner realm. Alone in my house after this long and exhausting night, I pondered what had transpired. As miserable as I felt, somewhere deep inside me there was a blissful tranquility. For a fleeting moment, I caught a glimpse of it and yearned to remain there forever. At that moment I knew there was a God after all, and He loved me. Though I was sore all over, strangely enough I was not hurting anymore.